Have you ever wondered why big technology companies are building nuclear reactors now? In 1979, at 3 Mile Island in the US, America witnessed the worst nuclear accident in its history. One of the two reactors at this station collapsed, and although there were no deaths from the incident, the fear it sparked was immense. Voices rose at that time calling for the abandonment of nuclear energy, and this sentiment continued to impact the entire industry. Over time, the 3 Mile Island station struggled to stay operational, running for many years with just its second reactor. But in 2019, it finally closed for good due to economic feasibility issues, like many older plants across America. However, in the past 2 years, some developments have changed everything. Last September, we were surprised to learn that the same station where this nuclear disaster took place would be back in operation. Microsoft signed a 20-year contract to purchase the energy produced from this station. Not long after, Google announced it had signed the first institutional agreement in the world to purchase nuclear energy from a new type of nuclear reactors. These are called standard reactors. Google is supporting the construction of 7 of these new reactors. And it's not just Google or Microsoft. Many tech companies are now looking at nuclear energy in a surprising new way. In fact, there are even ongoing negotiations involving a third nuclear power plants in America. Why are they doing all this, and why now? Today, I'll tell you about artificial intelligence, and you'll understand why in this episode. You'll also learn about the major challenges and obstacles facing tech companies, and America in general. The biggest obstacle here is Russian dominance. Russia holds a strong, productive position in global nuclear production. So, how did Russia build this strength, and how did America's actions contribute to Russia's position today? Why does artificial intelligence need nuclear energy? And what's the role of small nuclear reactors? This is what we'll discuss in today's episode. Grab your coffee and focus with me. In December 1989, the Berlin Wall collapsed, accelerating the series of events that would eventually end the Soviet Union. It fully disintegrated a few years later. One of the issues that preoccupied America during this time was one major concern for America after the Soviet Union's collapse was the Soviet nuclear arsenal. What would happen to it? It needed to be dismantled. Otherwise, it would remain a global threat. So, America tried to persuade Russia to sell off its surplus weapons, which would bring in a considerable profit. But the Russians refused. How could they simply hand over their weapons to their historical enemy? That idea was unthinkable. America didn't stop there, though. They proposed another solution. Instead of selling the weapons themselves, what about selling the uranium from these weapons? By selling the uranium to nuclear power plants around the world, Russia could still earn a good income. The Russians began to consider this and thought, why not? We have a massive stockpile of nuclear warheads that we don't need. So, they accepted the American proposal, and in 1993, the Megatons to Megawatts project was launched. Through this project, Russia would extract highly enriched uranium, reduce its concentration, and then sell it to the US and other countries in need of low-enriched nuclear fuel. This agreement was set to last 20 years, bringing Russia $17 billion annually and, most importantly, leading to the elimination of 200,000 nuclear warheads. It was a mutually beneficial deal for everyone involved. By the late 1990s, Russia was already suffering economically. For Western countries, this situation was ideal. Not only could they help reduce the number of nuclear warheads, but they could also purchase nuclear fuel from Russia at a very low cost. The gains for America and the West were immense. But will these gains continue to be so significant? We'll find out soon. Let's set this story aside for now. We'll come back to it, don't worry. Now, let's talk about the technological boom we're currently experiencing, largely driven by artificial intelligence. This boom isn't without cost. AI requires a massive amount of energy to function. Did you know that a single response from ChatGPT consumes 10 times the electricity needed for a single Google search today? Keep in mind that, in the future, this demand will only grow. Currently, data centers worldwide consume between 1% and 2% of global energy. But in the next 20 to 30 years, this percentage is expected to rise to 3.4%, doubling the current rate. This is to be expected, given the rapid growth in the number of data centers globally, all of which require substantial electricity. If we continue to rely on current energy sources, we risk derailing climate protection goals, zero-emission targets, and related initiatives. So why should we stop artificial intelligence? Of course not. We need to find an energy source that's clean, sustainable, reliable, and economical to operate. Nuclear energy largely fits all these criteria. And if we rely on small nuclear reactors, the new type of reactor, this solution becomes even more appealing. These small reactors are already in high demand from technology companies, with shares in companies operating them seeing significant growth. So, what's special about these small reactors? Well, they produce between 10 and 300 megawatts. One reactor of this type can power hundreds of thousands of homes, whereas the larger stations, typically producing over 1,000 megawatts, can power more than 1 million homes. You might ask, why build smaller reactors when we could build larger ones to produce more energy? The answer is that these smaller reactors have distinct advantages. They require less cooling water and take up much less space than large plants, allowing for greater flexibility in choosing their location. Large stations, by contrast, have stricter location requirements. This flexibility opens up opportunities for nuclear power plants in a wider range of areas. Nuclear energy can now reach places where it was previously impossible, especially remote areas with challenging conditions, like mountains or icy regions such as Iceland. These remote areas are often ideal for housing powerful data centers, making this a great opportunity for technology companies in isolated locations worldwide. These reactors are known as advanced modular reactors or small modular reactors. Their modularity is a huge economic advantage. Modularity means the reactor is divided into multiple parts during production and manufacturing, making it easy to assemble on-site. Each part is manufactured separately and then transported to the desired location, where they can be connected and installed as a complete unit. This approach greatly simplifies building, transporting, installing, and operating the reactor, reducing costs significantly. Plus, this process takes far less time than constructing large power plants. Another key benefit is that these small reactors have higher safety levels compared to larger stations due to their design. In case of an accident, they can automatically protect themselves without direct human intervention. Small modular reactors truly signal a new era for nuclear energy use, allowing us to deploy them almost anywhere. Now, you might be wondering, if everything sounds so perfect, why are there still so many obstacles and challenges? If the world seems so ready for this change, what's holding things back? Well, although the world is indeed advancing, a number of issues persist. The first major challenge for American companies is that the US is currently behind in developing this type of reactor compared to Russia and China. As of now, America doesn't have any small nuclear reactors in operation. While it's working to address this and aims to deploy its first small reactor within 5 or 6 years, some estimates suggest this might not happen until after 2030. Meanwhile, Russia already has a small reactor in service since 2019. This reactor is mounted on a floating station aboard a ship, allowing it to move anywhere and provide power to about 200,000 homes on demand. This setup serves as a mobile emergency power station. China, too, has begun operating its first commercial small modular reactor, the ACP-100. Which is currently the first of its kind to operate on a commercial scale. It's important to understand that developing a final reactor design is an extremely complex process. Achieving a finalized design can take many years to gain approval. This stage is not easy, and in America, it can take years. Currently, there are over 70 designs, but only one has passed all the complex procedures, and even this design may only be implemented in 20 to 30 years. Meanwhile, Russia and China are leading in this field. The country that advances first will likely secure a strong share of the global market, if not full control and dominance. Being ahead allows them to develop faster, recognize problems sooner, and gain extensive knowledge of all potential issues that might arise in this new sector. For America, this is a significant challenge. It needs to quickly establish its place in this sector and at least begin by meeting its local demand. This will take time and years for the US to accomplish. This is the first problem facing America and technology companies. The second issue is that this type of reactor requires a special type of fuel, uranium enriched to just under 20%. This differs greatly from the fuel used in regular nuclear plants, where uranium is enriched to only 3 to 5%. For these small reactors, raising the fuel concentration to nearly 20% is fine for operation. However, it's important to remember that if this higher concentration fuel falls into the wrong hands, the results could be disastrous. This level of uranium enrichment, around 20%, has theoretical potential for nuclear weapon production, as some studies suggest. According to nuclear specialists, while creating a nuclear weapon from this concentration is technically possible, it would not be straightforward. It would demand expertise, rare materials, substantial funds, and extensive effort. Even if someone managed to create a weapon from this fuel, it wouldn't compare to advanced nuclear bombs in terms of power, but it would still pose a significant threat. As John Lee, a nuclear engineering professor at the University of Michigan, explains, such a bomb might lack the strength of traditional nuclear weapons but would still cause extensive destruction if it exploded. This is the concern surrounding the distribution of this fuel. As small modular reactors, SMRs, become widespread, many countries will need access to this enriched uranium. Even if smaller, politically sensitive nations are excluded, developed countries that previously had limited nuclear access may now find themselves in possession of fuel that could potentially be weaponized. This risk is one of the major concerns and obstacles in the adoption of SMRs worldwide. This creates a major problem for the development of small modular reactors, SMRs, using nuclear fuel with uranium concentrations below 20%. The global supply and production of this fuel are highly concentrated in just a few countries, primarily Russia, which controls the majority of this supply. Russia's dominance in this market complicates the ability of other nations to compete or gain access to uranium with the necessary isotopic concentration for nuclear reactors. While uranium ore is mined globally, mainly from countries like Russia, Kazakhstan, Canada, Australia, Namibia, and Niger, it still requires substantial processing to convert it into usable fuel. Uranium ore naturally contains a mix of isotopes, including uranium-238, which makes up about 77% of the ore. To use the ore as fuel for reactors, the uranium-235 isotope, which is the key radioactive material for fission, must be concentrated. This typically involves enriching the ore, raising the uranium-235 concentration to 3 to 5% for conventional reactors. However, for reactors using uranium enriched to 20%, for SMRs, even more sophisticated processing is required, which few countries can easily or economically manage. This control over the supply chain and fuel production presents a significant geopolitical challenge, particularly as small modular reactors become more desirable for clean energy solutions. The reliance on countries like Russia for this crucial fuel could potentially disrupt energy security and contribute to international tensions. A significant dependency, especially considering that the United States imports 90% of its uranium needs. Russia controls a large portion of the global uranium enrichment capacity, with 46% of the total. This gives Russia a dominant position in the global nuclear fuel market, which has been a concern for many countries, particularly the US. Even after the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the imposition of sanctions on Russia by the US and its allies, the US continued to rely heavily on Russian uranium. It wasn't until May that sanctions were applied to Russian uranium, though these sanctions include exemptions, with some supplies still being allowed until 2027. This delay in reducing dependency on Russian uranium highlights the challenges the US faces in securing alternative supplies, especially given the difficulty in scaling up domestic uranium enrichment capacities or finding reliable substitutes. This dependency is a major obstacle for the US as it works toward the deployment of small modular reactors, SMRs, which require uranium with an enrichment level of 20% or less. The difficulty in achieving this enrichment domestically and the reliance on foreign sources for enriched uranium, particularly from Russia, could complicate the transition to these new energy technologies, making energy security a more pressing issue. Of the global uranium market, the US faces significant challenges in developing its own uranium supply chain to meet the demand for small modular reactors, SMRs. While the US is making efforts to support domestic production and collaborate with European companies to compete with Russia, the timeline for achieving self-sufficiency is uncertain. The optimistic projection is that the US can reduce its dependence on Russian uranium within 5 years, but some experts believe this is overly optimistic, especially when it comes to producing uranium enriched to the levels required for SMRs. The one company in the US licensed to produce this type of fuel can only produce about 900 grams annually, a minuscule amount compared to the 40 tons needed to power these new reactors by 2030. This situation places the US in a vulnerable position, particularly as Russia maintains a dominant share of the uranium market. While America is actively working to address these issues, its reliance on Russian uranium and the slow pace of domestic production remain major obstacles to its ambitions in the nuclear energy sector. The challenge of regaining its competitive edge in the nuclear energy market. While Russia has steadily invested in uranium enrichment technologies and nuclear reactor development over the years, the US has lagged behind, largely due to its reliance on cheap Russian uranium. The megawatt deal you referred to, which provided the US with abundant and low-cost Russian nuclear fuel, inadvertently weakened the American uranium enrichment sector, making it less profitable and leading to the closure of many American enrichment facilities. This long-term reliance on Russian fuel has left the US struggling to catch up. Even though the US is now attempting to recover lost ground, with plans to invest in domestic uranium enrichment and reactor development, Russia's consistent investment in the sector has allowed it to dominate both the uranium extraction and nuclear power plant construction markets globally. With nearly $200 billion in contracts to build nuclear power stations worldwide, Russia's position as a leader in nuclear energy is formidable. For America, the path forward involves addressing its domestic uranium supply issues, increasing investment in advanced technologies, and accelerating the development of small modular reactors. However, the window to close the gap and reclaim a substantial share of the global nuclear market is narrowing, as Russia continues to strengthen its hold on the sector. The competition between America, China, and Russia in the nuclear energy sector is indeed a crucial issue for the future of global energy markets. As you mentioned, America faces significant challenges in closing the technological gap with both China and Russia, particularly in areas like uranium enrichment and nuclear reactor development. China, in particular, is making rapid progress in nuclear energy and artificial intelligence, which are closely linked to energy production and efficiency. While America is attempting to catch up, it remains to be seen if it can overcome these obstacles within the next 4 to 5 years. The stakes are high, as nuclear energy, along with solar and wind energy, will play a vital role in achieving zero emissions and combating climate change. However, history suggests that America has a pattern of lagging behind in certain technological sectors, as seen in solar and wind energy, where China now leads. Whether America can close the gap or risk losing leadership in the nuclear energy sector to China and Russia remains uncertain. The challenge is not only technological but also geopolitical, as countries like China and Russia solidify their dominance in global nuclear energy markets. It's clear that the outcome will have a significant impact on America's energy future, as well as its role in global climate efforts. The next few years will be critical in determining whether the US can regain its standing or if it will continue to rely on other nations for advanced energy technologies.